This is Mike Franklin, the property tax guy, and I wanted to do a revision of my Killdozer discussion I'd previously done. I'd made some pretty substantial, I think, factual errors unintentionally, and I wanted to correct that. For example, I'd indicated that Heemeyer had demoed the police department in the judge's house, and that wasn't the case. They didn't even have a police department. Although he did crush apparently a undercover car at the Bats plant, the first place that he destroyed. What other errors did that make? I basically my intent was to basically discuss, how municipalities, treat the public, improperly, in my opinion. And I wasn't really focusing on the details of the case. I did it from memory, from having, I think, watched the documentary from a couple of years past. So I was just talking off the top of my head from my recollection of what had transpired. And so I was incorrect about a couple of things. I think he would have liked to have gone demoed the judge's house, and if there was a police department, he might have demoed that if it was convenient on his route. But he didn't. That didn't happen. Although he seemed to get pretty much everybody on his list, and the town board, the members, the former mayor's house, the people on the planning board, and so I think he got most of his checklist taken care of. But what I did do, what I realized was that what I'd watched was a documentary that was co-produced by one of the people who had had their buildings destroyed by this guy, the newspaper guy. And so it was a bit of a biased story, and they wanted to give the appearance that they were being unbiased by saying that he was a congenial guy and all this stuff. But I looked at some other sources, and there's more to the story, and it's hard to know exactly what the truth was. Just a lot of hearsay, and who knows really what the facts are. But I listened to 3 hours of his audio suicide note, essentially, explaining his rationale. So I got his side of the story too. And the points of view are rather different. And although I will also say, he didn't appear to be drunk when he was doing all this stuff, or anything of that nature. I think that he was perfectly sane. He was just really pissed. But also, he may have been a little bit deluded, because he talks about God a lot, and it was God's plan that he do this. And he disliked these people because they're a bunch of Catholics and stuff, and apparently he's a different variant. He doesn't like the Pope and all that kind of stuff. So he kind of ranted and raved about the religious stuff, and how people had wronged him over the years, and that he'd be a massively wealthy man had people not screwed him over the years. But the reality is he paid 42 grand for the building, and if you think he would have been a multimillionaire, what's 42 grand? But basically, what it appears happened is that they made it so he couldn't rent out portions of his building and get income from it over the course of 10 years, and that hurt him financially. So I think this situation was a lot about money. He ultimately got 400 grand for the building, so he had 400 grand, cash that he ended up giving to his father, that it was distributed to his siblings. But I think until he got that 400 grand, he was at the end of the line as cash flows. It's kind of what he was leading on to. So yeah, it was about money pressures, I guess, and just feeling that he was that he'd been wronged. He was only 52 years old, but he didn't think he could do the welding business anymore, which is odd, because in other words, he didn't feel as though he was physically capable of continuing to do this, despite the fact that he did a hell of a job building this bulldozer. He didn't seem to have a problem doing that. But he was an angry man, and like his friend said, he spent too much time in the hot tub alone. So apparently he was a lonely guy. But despite all that, um, that doesn't mean that he wasn't wronged by these people with their petty nonsense. My observation is they wanted to, push through this uh, concrete batch plant, and I tell you, the zoning and what activities in that town they spot zoned, for the benefit of apparently their buddy, and apparently that's not appropriate. I don't know much about zoning, but they had this huge propane facility right next to a development of senior housing. That doesn't seem like good zoning to me. And also, I believe that there was a motel that was near the batch plant. It's getting the dust. They didn't want it either. But I think from the town's perspective, money talks, BS walks. We got a $42,000 property, probably not paying a lot of property taxes, and we got a concrete batch plant. It's going to generate some business, and so they didn't have much concern for the $42,000 property. And good old Marv, the outsider, and so they they hemmed the guy up and strung him out and cost him money, and he got himself into a bad place. But anyway, my overall point is that the behavior of this town and the petty nonsense that went on to get this guy, and again, right from the beginning, he bought the property at auction, but the guy with the concrete batch plant wanted it, and the guy held a grudge against him for years, and that guy had more influence with the town than he did, and so basically it was them against him. That's the way he felt anyway. And whether or not it was an organized attempt, to screw him over, who knows? But yeah, just petty abuses of power, and like I said, this is not abnormal at all. From my experience, I participated in hundreds of assessment cases across this state, 39 counties so far, and just the pettiness and the that goes on in these small municipalities, small large municipalities too. The stuff that goes on in the city of Syracuse is insane. But but it's just these small towns, they just they have the power to ignore people, and then they have attorneys that they're taking taxpayer money to hire attorneys to abuse the taxpayers, and then if you sue them and win, it doesn't hurt them, it hurts the taxpayers because the taxpayers pay for it. It's just it's insane. It's an insane process, and they've got immunities, they're not accountable. All you can do is vote them out of office, and that's apparently what you have to do, because suing him is he had his frustration with with the judge. He was claiming that the judge on his case that basically said he can't use his building until he gets the sewer in there, and he couldn't get the sewer in there because he couldn't get an easement, and because they're squeezing him, and then they want to charge him 70 grand or whatever, 60 to 80 grand to hook up, and they had him between a rock and a hard place, and he's not generating any revenue from the building, and they want him to spend 70 grand on a sewer hookup for a property he paid $42,000 for, and so they squeezed him, and he became angry, and he decided that was it, and so he built this contraption and he drove through the town, and just imagine if he had ignited one of those enormous propane tanks next to that housing development. So that's an issue I had with him, because I think that he thought that he could blow those things up, because that's why he was over there, and that's not cool. I mean, now his thing is kind of a Robin Hood situation where he only destroyed the properties of those who had wronged him. Well, blowing up the propane facility next to the old folks' facilities uh, doesn't meet that that agenda. Um, and so, some people were saying, well, he was just trying to make them leak and cause the EPA problems. No, he was firing 50 caliber incendiary rounds at propane tanks, and he couldn't hit them because the metal on his thing obstructed his rifle. So if it wasn't obstructed, who knows what would happen? I mean, those tanks were just enormous, and they say that you shoot a propane tank with a gun, it's just going to put a hole in it and just going to leak. It's not going to blow up. You'd need some sort of a spark, but what does an incendiary round do? It creates a spark. So I don't know. That wasn't cool at all. So I don't think that there's any innocent parties in this situation. He's deluded with his God stuff, and he I think he tried to blow up the propane facility. But other than that, he did a great job taking out the newspaper guys building, and the Thompsons, the guys who are on the planning board that were abusing him. He took out the concrete batch plant. He took out the former mayor's house. He took out the town hall. He took out the hardware store, I think it was, for this guy who was on the town board. He made quite a mess, but he's an interesting guy. I think he was a bit on the diluted side. All of his claims, but I can appreciate his frustration. And so there's no innocent parties in this case, particularly the town. It was just a bunch of petty power plays, and so he did what he did. This is Mike Franklin, the property tax guy.